illustrate to you the role that our parliamentarians have played to try and engender green industrialization in Namibia, but if possible to actually build value chains across the continent, as Honorable Katamelo had encouraged us to consider doing. So if we start off with my next slide, I really have 8 concepts that I'd like to share with you, and sometimes it's always useful to start with a bit of an icebreaker. So what does hydrogen have in common with sugar? At first, perhaps not much, but the truth is when we started focusing on hydrogen as a key catalyst for engendering green industrialization in Namibia, we had some very heated debates, of course, at the time in State House with our late president and, of course, with our peers. And this was one of the things that helped us understand the utility of this molecule. Sugar can be used as an ingredient to help make many products, whether it's cakes, sweets, pancakes, cupcakes, you name it. And as you can see, you can get the natural variety, fructose, that can come in bananas, oranges, apples, but you can also get the synthetic variety, which you can put in sweeteners and in other products that we manufacture. But at the core of this plethora of different products is sugar. Okay, so now we've got that concept perhaps sorted out. The next slide now begins to take you through a journey. Of course, for those who know, I joined the presidency in September 2020, and in October 2020, we got approached by a developer, actually from Australia, who came and told us a little bit of what the DG told us. Namibia has the best conditions in the world for creating this wonder molecule. So we said, what could we do with the molecule? The previous slide helped us realize that we could create fertilizer, shipping fuel. We could use it to reduce and add value to our own minerals here at home and many more. And so after a debate, by the time our late president launched the then second Harambee Prosperity Plan, we had resolved to replace the front cover of HPP2, which had an agricultural pivot, which signified the important nature of agriculture in our country. Of course, it's the largest employer, and we replaced it with the green hydrogen molecule. This, of course, as you can imagine, in September 2021 was quite a controversial thing to do, because not everyone knew what exactly we would do with this green molecule. But what we did, and this is now my assignment, to speak to the role of parliamentarians. On page, I think it was 32 or 36 of HPP2, there was a specific recipe that the head of state and his cabinet put together to try and start developing what you had gone through yesterday. As you can see, one of the first things he did was he put together an interministerial group of ministers, supported by the central bank governor, the head of the investment promotion, and the economic advisor, who was then appointed as the Green Hydrogen Commissioner. The 5 ministers were the ministers of mines and energy, of course, to recognize that you needed clean energy to make this molecule. Our Minister of Environment, who is with us today, he is a parliamentarian in Namibia. This is, of course, Honorable Pohamba Shifeta. We had our Minister of Finance to realize that you had to mobilize catalytic capital, fit-for-purpose capital, concessional capital, climate finance. This is what the EIF and the GCF do very well. We had our Minister of Agriculture, Water and Land, recognizing, of course, the utility of being able to give land secured land tenure. And then, of course, to put it all together, the committee was chaired by the National Planning Commission Director General, because we realized that to put together this new industry, it would need a cross-cutting lead. We then went on to say that we needed to put together a strategy, which we did, and we launched that in, I think, 2022, and a few other things, including start to develop, for example, projects that were going to get to FID, a regional vision, etc. So by November 2022, we did put together a strategy that encompassed all of the visions of the government in terms of what was possible. It was clear we could deploy multi-billion dollars of investments, attract new technology to Namibia, educate our young people about these new opportunities and so on and so forth. So this particular document is public. But the very first thing, which is quite strategic for any of us that want to learn from each other, was the government realized that we needed to establish a dedicated secretariat. A group of young Namibians that would eat, breathe, read, study, research this particular. The government, in partnership with various members and development partners from around the world, established what was then named the Implementation Authority Office, which was later renamed to be called the Namibian Green Hydrogen Program. So the Green Hydrogen Program essentially was a secretariat for governments to research this particular new area, mobilize capital, and of course engender the training of Namibians. So this is what the team looks like. We're now 17 strong members. We have engineers, civil and electrical engineers, CFA charter holders from a finance perspective, skills development specialists, and many others, some of whom came back home from the United States, from London, from Germany. Others moved across from government. We have people who worked in the Attorney General's office with 15 years of experience. So this collective now squarely sits under our new Minister of Industries, Mines and Energy, Honorable Ntangu Itete. This particular unit would report into that ministry, giving regular progress of what it is that we're doing, where we are in terms of developing new legislation, which is what we have to do now, this sectoral legislation we're developing to be reviewed by the ministry. And of course, we're championing, for example, a skills development strategy. Some of you may see this right now in the South. There is scholarship runs running there as well. So that group of people ended up putting together this particular strategy. And as you can see, it's not a green hydrogen strategy. It is a green industrialization blueprint. And the central bank recognized our president's effort, our late president's effort, by issuing this commemorative note signifying 60 years of public service for our late president. At the back of that particular note, you can see there was a recognition of his vision for clean energy, but clean energy's ability to, of course, mobilize this clean molecule, which, of course, is a unique ingredient for the industrial classes that you started to see yesterday. The next slide then really takes, I think, Honorable Katamelo's point home. Our president, together with all of his members of cabinet, were staunch Pan-Africanists. Many of you know, or who know about Namibia's independence journey, would have known that Namibia really, we used to be called, President used to say that we were midwifed by the United Nations, and we were a child of international solidarity. Of course, Honorable Katamelo knows more about that than me, and he's tried to tell us a little bit about that. And so when we were putting together this strategy, I remember being wrapped around the knuckles with a ruler, because the strategy used to focus on Namibia. And this particular map was a map that he really told us to think hard about. You see, Namibia has a coastline of about 1,000 kilometers, and he always used to say that while that coastline is ours, it actually serves our neighbors. Today, a lot of Zambian copper goes through our borders. We provide a lot of fuel for Botswana through our borders. A lot of manganese and iron ore comes from South Africa through our coastline. So he always reminded us that Namibia was not just to look after itself, but to serve the broader hinterland of SADC, which of course had 300 million people. So with that in mind, the Green Industrialization Blueprint recognizes that Namibia, according to the map that the DG showed us, has renewable energy potential beyond what it can use on its own. So those blue lines indicate the potential for Namibia to actually trade renewable energy with its neighbors once we start truly harnessing the cheap solar that the Director General was talking to us about. And at the same time, as we give that clean energy to our neighbors, you can see our neighbors have mineral endowments beyond our own endowments. So Zambia has copper, South Africa and Zimbabwe have platinum, they have manganese, others have iron ore. Could we actually bring some of those minerals to Namibia, add value to them using our clean energy, and export new products from the region that are high in value and sustainable in nature because they have a low carbon footprint, especially as we're exporting into a world that is beginning to discriminate on goods based on their carbon content. These are called carbon leakage policies. The one we all know about is the one in the EU called the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanisms that will slap a tariff on 6 specific goods: ammonia, iron ore, hydrogen, etc., based on how much carbon was used to produce those goods. The UK is introducing theirs a year after Europe. Australia is already developing theirs. It's live, it's online, you can go read about it. South Korea, the United States, all of these countries are beginning to study and or soon implement carbon leakage policies. Why? Because when they tell their own industries to decarbonize and they start taxing them, if they don't tax similar goods coming into their country, they will lose those industries to other countries where they are more lax climate policies. So for us, this became an industrial policy to think about, and as we develop our synthetic fuels policy with our ministry, it is the work of parliamentarians to study these different jurisdictions, understand the implications for trade and industrial formation, and of course our president, our existing president, President Nandi Ndaitwah, is extremely strategic because she took the Ministry of Industry and she combined it with the Ministry of Mines and Energy. Why? Because she recognizes that in order to industrialize, you need to utilize key inputs such as energy and key minerals. And in order to then create sustainable industrial clusters, there needs to be tight integration between the mobilization of those resources. And so, Honorable Katamelo, I thought your delivery was so inspiring as an African who spent, perhaps I'm not really a child of the 1884 declaration. I was born in Tanzania, I lived in Kenya, I'm now married to a Namibian and live in Namibia. I've ignored those boundaries a little bit and moved across sub-Saharan Africa like it was one continent. And I believe strongly in what Honorable Katamelo said. What we do here in Namibia can be of service to other nations across the continent. I'm glad all of you have come to do those studies. The next slide then really begins to take us into the next chapter. This was the previous administration. Our existing administration, as I've mentioned, has done some very strategic things. Our total cabinet has been reduced by 33%. We're the first nation in Africa with a female president and a female vice president. And very strategically, this very key ministry that will anchor industrialization has now been given a deputy prime minister to head it, which obviously, in my view, then gives this particular ministry quite a cross-cutting, I think, ability to mobilize various ministries to achieve those outcomes. Our president will hopefully be launching our 6th National Development Plan in the next few weeks. And within that NDP 6, it has various key strategic pillars. One of them, unless of course she changes her mind, may very well be a green hydrogen focused pillar. And within that pillar, all of what I'm telling you has been succinctly captured and broken down into SMART goals, specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and timely goals that we then have to deliver as a nation. Of course, this is a picture of her launching on the 11th of April, 2025, the project that produced the pellets that you saw yesterday. First of its kind in the world. This was her pressing the button that started the production process. Of course, this particular project is now looking to scale up 10 times, hopefully with an FID by the end of this year. And of course, it's a recipient of strategic capital that has been deployed by the EIF, climate finance, deployed by the EIF through a strategic partnership with our colleagues from the Dutch. They've invested, I think, about 12.5 million to facilitate that scale up. So the sort of final slide really, I think, is this is chapter 2 for government. But where do we go to from here for the Namibian Green Hydrogen Program? Earlier In fact, late last year, the Green Hydrogen Program, together with the Ministry of Finance and other members of government, applied for a strategic program called the Industry Decarbonization Program from the Climate Investment Funds. And Namibia ranked third in its application in the world. We were told this on the 13th of June 2025. The idea is that we could deploy up to $250 million of concessional capital from the CIF to be bundled up with capital from other MDBs. And that capital could be used to invest in the projects that you saw, to facilitate green fertilizer production, green shipping, potentially rare earth element processing, lithium processing, to establish a green industrial zone, which again is something being pursued by the EIF with the UNIDO Mitigation Action Facility and others. And so we want to do that with strategic partners from around the continent, but more importantly, we want to form something called the African Sustainable Industrialization Institute. This will be a continental center of excellence, headquartered right here in Namibia, but tasked with helping African governments and African companies to understand and exploit the opportunities created by green industrialization. We would have two arms. One arm would help with policy development, so working closely with governments and parliamentarians to help you put together strong policies that will make you competitive relative on a global basis. And on the other side, if we succeed in helping you establish these policies, we would like to then mobilize strategic capital to enable you to deliver the industrial clusters that will bring economic emancipation and pride to all of us here on the continent. This is a journey that we're looking to walk over the next 6 months, and we cannot do it, of course, without the support of our own leaders here at home, both in Parliament, but most importantly in Cabinet. And it is an idea that we will be discussing with our Deputy Prime Minister, our Prime Minister, our Green Hydrogen Council, our President. But we do think that the lessons that we have learned here in Namibia are replicable, and they can be shared with the rest of us on the continent to help us come up with an economic outcome that we can all be proud of, and that can help us achieve that economic emancipation that Honorable Katamela was talking to us about earlier in his delivery. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to me, and of course we'll be